Hello, everybody. Welcome to Zone Defense. Be sure to follow us on Spotify at Zone Defense Podcast, on Twitter at Zone Defense Podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Zone Defense Podcast. And be sure to ring that bell to get post notifications. All of our episodes are also now on Apple Podcasts. Unfortunately, Chris was not feeling well and will not be joining us, but Roman is here, and we will be going through the AFC West today. How's it going, Roman?
I'm good, Drew. How are you?
Pretty good. We kind of teased it in our last division episode that this was a division that we were super excited about. Are you still really intrigued by all four teams in this division?
Yeah, I don't think there's any team that's going to be absolutely trash this year, but I think they all have a possibility of finishing maybe above 500, but we'll see about that.
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. I think it's safe to say there's probably one clear-cut number one team in this division, but then 2, 3, and 4, there's a roadmap for all three of them to finish in really any order. Last year, it was kind of disappointing, I guess you could say, for those teams, but they really didn't have, outside of the Chargers maybe, they didn't really have lofty expectations, but we really only had one playoff team come out of this division. Broncos, Raiders, and Chargers, they were all pretty league average, but I know all three teams made some big moves in the offseason. They're trying to make that expanded playoff field in the AFC, but there's a lot of, as we've kind of gone through each division, there's a lot of solid teams. But I think the Chargers, Raiders, and Broncos, we'll dive into a little bit here in a second, but I think they're all pretty solid.
Yeah, I agree. They all made some big moves in the offseason, got some big names in there as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if any of those three made the playoffs, as well as the Chiefs, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. Let's jump into the first team here, the Los Angeles Chargers. They did finish last year in the AFC West, finished at 5-11. I would say this is probably the team I'm the most out on of these four teams, just because of the big questions at quarterback. They obviously lost a long time, probably the best quarterback in Chargers history, arguably, in Phillip Rivers. He's been there for, 15, 16 years, I think it was. So that's a big loss. But I think they have a decent team around, whether it be Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert at quarterback. But I like the other teams a little bit more. But let's dive into the Chargers here. In terms of additions, they added offensive tackle Brian Bulaga, offensive guard Trey Turner, defensive tackle Linval Joseph, cornerback Chris Harris, linebacker Nick Vigil, and wide receiver Darius Jennings. In terms of subtractions, I mentioned it there. Phillip Rivers, longtime quarterback, went to the Colts. They also lost longtime running back Melvin Gordon III to the Broncos, division rival. Offensive tackle Russell Okung to the Panthers. That was kind of a trade, I believe, back in March, right before the pandemic hit. Linebacker Thomas Davis to the Washington football team. Fullback Derek Watt to the Steelers. Safety Adrian Phillips to the Patriots. Cornerback Jalen Watkins to the Texans. Offensive guard Michael Schofield to the Panthers. And wide receiver Travis Benjamin to the 49ers. In the draft, as I mentioned, they drafted quarterback Justin Herbert out of Oregon. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on Herbert. I know Chris is not a fan of Herbert. But I'm interested to see how you feel about Herbert, if he really is the future for this franchise. They also got, in my opinion, one of the biggest steals in the draft in linebacker Kenneth Murray out of Oklahoma with their other first-round pick, which was pick 23 overall. Murray, I thought, was a really good prospect and was projected to go a little bit higher, so he kind of fell to them at pick 23. They didn't have a second or third-round pick, but in the fourth round, they took running back Joshua Kelly out of UCLA. As I mentioned, I still am not completely out on this team, but I definitely think the odds of them making the playoffs are probably the lowest out of any team in this division. But what do you think? Do you think the Chargers are a good team? Do you still have the kind of concerns at the quarterback position that I do, or what do you think about them?
Yeah, I think this team will look completely different depending on who's starting at quarterback. I assume that Tyrod Taylor will start the year on the field, and I hope Herbert gets some action by the time the season comes to an end. But like I said, they will look different because I think they're both different quarterbacks, but they have some similarities. They both have the running attack. They both can have the arm. The only concern I have with Herbert is the accuracy, but I think once he nails it down, he should be an everyday starter. Hopefully he's kind of working on that in camp right now and kind of making a push for that starting role at the beginning of the season, but I do expect Tyrod Taylor to be in there for the first couple of weeks at least.
I'm right there with you. I think Anthony Lynn, their head coach, said just as much, that he was probably going to be the number one guy, at least to start. I'm looking at their depth chart right now as well, and he is listed as the number one starter. I think Tyrod Taylor is a fine quarterback. I know he gets a lot of hate, but I think he's just the league average, maybe slightly below league average. He offers you a little in the run game. He can make a throw here and there, but I don't love the arm talent. And we kind of saw his last really big starting gig was with Cleveland when he eventually got injured in that Thursday night game against the Jets and was eventually dethroned by Baker Mayfield. But it wasn't a great season for him by any means. I thought he looked pretty brutal there, if I'm being honest, at the start of that 2018 season. But I still think he's a fine quarterback. He's not going to win you any games, but I also don't think he's going to lose you any games either. With Justin Herbert, though, I mean, I think he's a fine prospect. But I think I don't really love him being taken 6th overall. I think if I was the Chargers, you maybe could have waited and taken a Isaiah Simmons, taken somebody with that pick, and then waited till your pick 23, where you took Kenneth Murray and maybe got a guy like Jordan Love, because I don't really think the fall off from Herbert to Love is huge. And we've just seen in the past, I don't want to be collegeist, but we've seen in the past Oregon quarterbacks are just not really good quarterbacks in the NFL. Look at Mariota, who I guess isn't awful, but he was taking it with a super high pick as well, was not good. Joey Harrington, former Lion from forever ago, a bunch of other Oregon quarterbacks that are really just completely irrelevant. They just don't pan out in the NFL for whatever reason. So maybe Herbert can kind of overcome that, but I don't love, I mean, the arm's there, but I don't love the arm talent. And obviously, like you said, I think Taylor is going to start probably the majority of the games this season. But when you're just looking for the future of this franchise, I just don't love Justin Herbert, in my opinion, at least. I think there was better options, that maybe not in this year's draft, but maybe just waiting until next year's draft as well.
Yeah, there was a lot of quarterback needy teams in this draft, so I didn't think anyone would want to maybe wait and to see who maybe trades up. I know we kind of expected maybe any trade ups in the top 10. There were barely any trade ups. So the Chargers had to sit still and take their guy who I know they could have had Tua if he fell to them, but I do think Herbert could have gone a little bit later in drafts. I know many people mocked him maybe in like the 20s or maybe not even in the first round at all. And I also think that in past drafts where you see other or better quarterback classes, he wouldn't be such a high pick as well. So I think it was just more about a need, and maybe they did reach a little bit, but Anthony Lynn, seems excited about him.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Like I said, I know I can't speak on Chris. I can speak on Chris's behalf in saying that he is completely out on Herbert. Is not a fan of Justin Herbert at all, even more so than I am. But the fact of the matter is, he's still a young guy. He's still a prospect. I thought he was fine last year at Oregon, but I just don't love the draft price. I would have much more preferred them to have taken even though I love Kenneth Murray, I would have much preferred them to take a better guy at that 6th overall pick. And then just wait and take, because Jordan Love was still available there at pick 23. And I think Jordan Love has obviously a bunch of question marks with him as well, but the upside is definitely there. And with Herbert, I just don't know, like, what is his, like, Love, I think, could have the potential to be one of the top 10, top 12 quarterbacks in the league if all things go right. Justin Herbert, though, I feel like he's much more going to be like a Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill type of guy, where it's just kind of like he's just an average quarterback. And I don't really love taking an average quarterback with your 6th overall pick, especially when you had a very disappointing season last year. As I said, they finished 5-11 when they had kind of playoff aspirations, but it is what it is. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But unfortunately, we'll probably have to wait till 2021 to truly see what the Chargers have here in Justin Herbert. But enough about the quarterback situation. Let's talk about the other offensive pieces here. As I mentioned, Melvin Gordon is gone. And for a lot of teams, if you lose your starting running back, that's probably an issue. But they had a really good backup in Austin Eckler the last few years. They also have a solid kind of skill position group overall, I would say. And a decent offensive line. What do you think about this offense? Do you think they're going to be able to, even with maybe a few question marks or at least average play at the quarterback position, do you think the other skill positions at least, will be able to kind of carry this offense maybe into the playoffs or something like that?
I certainly think it's possible. They have a nice receiving back in Eckler, who kind of emerged last season, kind of took over that role as a 1 and showed he could be a 1 in the future. So I'm glad the Chargers are sticking with him. They kind of also have some good wide receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Mike Williams kind of got banged up in camp a little bit, so we'll see what those updates are on him. But I think if everyone's healthy, that's the big key, health. I think they'll be good enough to sustain an offense and produce decently and compete in the division as well.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think the skill position group is pretty good. Mike Williams is obviously currently questionable, dealing with a little bit of an injury. It's likely he's probably going to end up on the injured list, but hopefully he can get back to health, because I think he's a really good quarterback, and I think he unfortunately just doesn't get as many touches as he would on maybe some other teams, because you got a guy like Keenan Allen who also has some injury concerns with him as well. They also have a really good tight end, I think, in Hunter Henry, but again, has injury concerns. So I think if they can stay healthy, I think Tyrod Taylor will be able to get them the ball enough for them to at least stay in games and probably win a lot of games as well. And Austin Eckler is a really good, not only I think just overall running back, I think will be able to offer a lot in the run game, which he previously wasn't able to offer because he was behind Melvin Gordon. And we already know how good of a pass catching back he is. But and like I mentioned as well, they have a decent offensive line. Nothing super fantastic, but it's solid. And it's just really important for those skill position guys to stay healthy, though, because as I mentioned, you can't rely. I at least don't believe in Justin Herbert enough to be like, here's the ball, kid. You can carry us with whoever is at receiver and tight end. And we already know with Tyrod Taylor, he's not going to win you games. As I already mentioned, he's not going to win you games, but he's also not going to lose you many games. And it's really important if they want to win games for these skill position guys to stay healthy, because I think Keenan Allen, again, I think you might be a little bit out on him, and same thing with Chris. I still think he's a really good receiver as long as he stays healthy and as long as Taylor can give him the ball. But that's the big kind of question mark with this offense, at least, is will the skill position guys outside of quarterback be able to stay healthy to kind of help overcome at least the average, slightly below average quarterback play. And I think if they stay healthy, I think this team can compete with anybody for sure. Especially, we haven't even mentioned they have a really, really good defense as well.
I completely agree. They'll compete in most of the games that they're in, and obviously it depends on what the defense does. They can probably compete in some shootouts along the way. Like you just said, it depends on the health, and that's pretty much the only question mark with this team. Yeah.
What do you think about this defense, though? Because I think they're a pretty solid group. I think they're I'd probably say top 10 probably in the league. They got a really good player in Joey Bosa, one of the best defensive players in the league. They got Melvin Ingram. Obviously, I just mentioned before they added Kenneth Murray in the draft. He's a really good player. Derwin James, Casey Hayward. They got a decent, really good, I think, in my opinion, defensive group. Probably not on the level of like a Baltimore Ravens or those type of teams, but still, I think the Chargers defense is going to keep this team in games regardless. And I think if the offense can just score enough points, I think they could probably make the playoffs. What do you think?
Yeah, I really like this defense. I'm happy they're able to lock up Joey Bosa for a long-term deal and give him the money he deserves. And like you said, Derwin James will be coming back. He had a little injury last year that kind of held him out for a while. But now that he's back, along with Bosa and Murray and Hayward, and I really love those signings, and Chris Harrison, Linval Joseph. I think they'll help the defense a lot, and I think they would be able to compete in the division.
Yeah, I mean the loss of Thomas Davis, I think, is notable for sure. But as you mentioned, they did add some really solid pieces to the defense as well. Nick Vigil too, they added to kind of fill that hole at linebacker, and they drafted Kenneth Murray as well. So I think the defense is going to be really good. It's just, as we've said before, as we said throughout talking about the Chargers here today, it's going to be a question of whether the offense can score enough points, because I think the defense is good enough to keep them in games. And I think if the offense stays healthy, I feel a lot better about this team's chances. Obviously, probably not winning the division because there's a big, huge juggernaut that we're going to talk about here at the end of the episode. But I think definitely be able to be better than the Raiders and the Broncos, and probably sneak into the playoffs as well. But big question mark there about whether the offense will be good enough or not. And I'm really interested to see if I kind of want Justin Herbert to play this year. I don't know how much he's going to play, but I'm just kind of curious to see what he will offer, because it sounds like you're a little bit more optimistic about him than I am. But I don't know. It'd be really interesting to see, because we kind of, sorry to all those Tyrod Taylor fans out there, but we kind of already know what Taylor's going to offer. So he isn't super intriguing, but it'll be fun to see.
I think and down the line, they'll obviously compare Herbert to Burrow and Tua, since they're all close in draft picks. So that will probably put them in a bad spot compared to those three or those two, and maybe even Love as well. So he could fall off, maybe like what Rosen was in that big draft class. But I do think Herbert does have some upside, and he's in the right system. He has the right coaches, I believe. I think Lynn will shape him into the quarterback that he wants.
And he's going to be as I already mentioned, if the guys can stay healthy, he's got a good offense around him as well. It's really going to help because it's not like it would be worse if you were putting him in a position that where there was no offensive pieces. They got a solid offensive line, and they have high end, in my opinion, at least other skill position players if they can stay healthy. But that's probably, again, more of a conversation for 2021 because Herbert, he's probably going to see some action, I think, for sure, but probably just not as much as we would like, and not enough for us to make a clear-cut decision on Herbert. But if you like Tyrod Taylor, this is probably going to be the team that you want to watch because he's got a lot of good pieces around him, and I think I think by all accounts, Anthony Lynn said he was looking good in camp. So maybe this is the Tyrod Taylor year. Who knows? But do you have any other thoughts on the Chargers, or do you want to jump into your fantasy pick?
No, I think we already hit it home with many of those points, so I'll just hop into my fantasy pick right now. Probably the most notable one is Austin Eckler, obviously. Last year in drafts, you got him really, really late, and if you're in a keeper league, you definitely want to keep him so you don't have to lose an early round pick for him. But now he's going to go in the second or third round. I think he's been dropping a little bit due to the rise of like a Sanders or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So he is dropping a little bit. So you can get him in the late second, early third. I've seen him in mocks, but definitely a PPR monster. He'll produce quite a bit in there. I'm a little lower on him in standard leagues, but I think he's the clear-cut number one, and I don't think there's much of a risk to his job. I know they're going to have Justin Jackson and Joshua Kelly in there to facilitate other ball carries, but I think Eckler is a clear-cut one, and you should be drafting him as you can draft him as your running back one or running back two.
Yeah, I think he's more of a low-end RB1, high RB2 in standard leagues. But PPR leagues, I mean, this is a guy you can take in the first round, early second round, and feel confident about it. I personally would not do that just because I think you could probably wait at least a little bit before you can get Austin and still get Austin Eckler because of people. He's not as well known of a name as like even a Melvin Gordon or a Dalvin Cook or a Christian McCaffrey, Zeke Elliott, those kind of guys. But he's still going to probably offer that amount of production. And Tyrod Taylor, like I mentioned before, he doesn't have the arm strength as some other quarterbacks do, so he's probably going to throw it off to Eckler a lot in the backfield and in kind of short passes. So Eckler's going to get you a lot of yards, probably get you some touchdowns. And I think even though he really wasn't asked to run a lot, he's still a decent runner, I think. Not a great runner, but still decent. Going to get you some yards on the ground. Going to get you some touchdowns. But you're really drafting him for the reception yards. So PPR leagues, he's a clear-cut RB1 in my opinion, and he's still going to be a high-end RB2 in standard leagues for sure. But yeah, Eckler's a great pick. I'll jump to my pick now. Eckler is obviously probably the best guy of this offense. I'll go with a guy though like Keenan Allen, which is probably a little bit of a shocker, but like I mentioned before, there's not a ton of options here on this Chargers team overall that I feel amazing about in terms of fantasy outside of Eckler. But Keenan Allen, if he drops a little bit because of the concern of injury, I still think he's a really good wide receiver 2, really high-end wide receiver 3, and that's kind of where he's going in at least some drafts. There are some drafts where he's going a lot higher than that, and I do not love that draft price just because, as we mentioned before, the question marks at quarterback and the injury concerns. I don't love him if you're taking him as your clear-cut wide receiver 2. But if you get good value for him, I think the talent's still there. We've seen it in the past. Of course, the drop-off from Phillip Rivers in terms of fantasy to a guy like Tyrod Taylor or an unknown in Justin Herbert, he's probably not going to have the amount of production he had in previous seasons, but I think he's still going to be a good wide receiver too. I think he's going to get the ball get a lot of touches, especially if Mike Williams and or Hunter Henry go down with injuries, and Mike Williams is already down with an injury. The touches are definitely going to be there for Keenan Allen. They're going to rely on him a lot, and I think he's going to be a really good, solid wide receiver 2 option. There's not a whole lot of wide receiver 1 upside in my opinion, but he's still going to be a solid player.
Yeah, the thing for me about Keenan Allen is that last year I had him as a wide receiver 2, and he had a lot of bust weeks. So for me, that is just my preference. I won't be drafting him this year, but if you want to wait a few rounds later than his ADP and take a chance on him and not have to risk him as your wide receiver 2, then I guess that's fine with me. But considering where he's going and the other wide receivers in that range, like a Brown or a Metcalf, there's plenty more upside in those guys than with Keenan Allen. And like you said, the quarterback situation could help or hurt him in fantasy this year. So I'm just gonna avoid it in general.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I think you're not to call you out or anything, but you're exactly the type of kind of team owner that I'd say if a lot of people are like you and are waiting on him, and he kind of drops a little bit, definitely take a chance on him, because I think he definitely can be a solid wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in my opinion. But as you mentioned, there are some serious question marks with the injuries. He had a lot of bust weeks last year, and it's not like they improved at quarterback. If anything, they got worse. So definitely some risk there. But as we've already mentioned, Eckler is the clear-cut number 1 guy in terms of fantasy in this offense, in this overall whole team as a whole. But Keenan Allen, I guess, is a distant second in terms of fantasy viable players out of this Los Angeles Chargers team. But I think we can jump in now to the next team, unless you have any other Chargers takes that you want to get off your chest right now. Okay. So let's jump into the Las Vegas Raiders. They obviously had a huge start to their year last year with the Antonio Brown saga. A lot of people were picking them. They were kind of like the Browns light in a way, because they run Hard Knocks and everybody was like, oh man, this Raiders team, John Gruden was there. They had Antonio Brown, as I mentioned. People were like, man, they're going to make the playoffs this year. And then the Antonio Brown saga happened. People were kind of out on them, and they got off to a really good start to the year, I felt like. And they had a kind of an easier schedule down the stretch. I think they were 6-3, I think. I remember they beat the Lions. It was looking like, hey, maybe this team's going to make the playoffs. And then they just completely fell off a cliff. Obviously finished 7-9, which is still a decent season, but not what they expected, I think, especially with Antonio Brown. And then even down, like it just said, down the stretch, they had the keys to the playoffs in their hands, and they just kind of blew it. So I know they made, as we can see with these additions, they made a lot of additions. They also lost a lot of players. They had some high draft picks as well. So they definitely want to win now, and it'll be interesting to see if they can maybe get back to the playoffs, because it's been, I think, a couple years since they were back in the playoffs. It was that one year when Connor Cook was the starting quarterback, when Derek Carr got injured against the Texans. That was crazy, but that was a couple years ago. So they want to get back to the playoffs, and we'll see if they can do it. But in terms of additions, they added linebacker Corey Littleton, defensive end Carl Nass. I can never say his name. But he was former Browns player, was on Hard Knocks, really funny guy, really cool guy. Linebacker Nick Kwiatkowski, quarterback Marcus Mariota, receiver Nelson Aguilar, safety Jeff Heath, tight end Jason Witten decided, hey, I'm done with doing Monday Night Football. I'm coming back to the Raiders, baby. Defensive tackle Malik Collins, safety Demarius Randall, cornerback Prince Yukamura. Always one of my favorite names to say in any sport. Running back Devontae Booker, and tight end Nick O'Leary. In terms of subtractions, they lost defensive end Benson Mayowa to the Seahawks, cornerback Darrell Worley to the Cowboys, linebacker Tahir Whitehead to the Panthers, safety Carl Joseph to the Browns, quarterback Mike Lennon to the Jaguars, running back DeAndre Washington to the Chiefs, defensive tackle P.J. Hall to the Texans, defensive end Deion Jordan to the 49ers, and then they had 3 opt-outs in linebacker Yukeem Elgiwe, defensive back DJ Killings, and defensive end Jeremiah Veloga. I think I said that right. I don't know. And then in terms of draft picks, they had 2 first-round picks, still kind of reaping the benefits. I believe this was the last first-round pick they got in the Khalil Mack trade a couple years ago. They took Henry Ruggs III, the wide receiver out of Alabama, with their first-round pick, which was the 12th overall pick, and then their other first-round pick, which was 19th overall. They took, somewhat surprisingly, Damon Arnett, the cornerback out of Ohio State. They also had 3 third-round picks in Lynn Bowden, wide receiver out of Kentucky, Brian Edwards, wide receiver out of South Carolina, and Tanner Muse, a safety out of Clemson. As I mentioned, this was a team that had a lot of expectations last year, and now their first year in Las Vegas, they obviously have lofty expectations this year as well. Do you think they'll be able to kind of live up to the hype and be a playoff team, or do you think they might be out for another disappointing season similar to the last year? And honestly, the last few seasons since they made the playoffs.
I do think they'll be one of the first teams in the hunt and potentially compete for a wild card spot. But I certainly think it's possible. You look at the past 2 seasons and the couple hauls they brought in the offseason and the draft. They're clearly strong in that aspect of the game through their 3 first-round picks last year in Cleveland Farrell, Josh Jacobs, and Jonathan Abram, as well as a surprise emerged by Max Crosby on the D-line. They're clearly ready to win. I think they're maybe 1 year away from competing, not like on the edge, but clear-cut wild card team. Definitely not competing for a division anytime soon, as long as Mahomes is on the field. But they definitely have the pieces to win, and their defense is probably going to be their stronghold this season. What do you think?
Yeah, I like this team. I mean, you look at their offense. I think they got a decent, solid offensive line, very similar to the Chargers in that it's not like spectacular, but it's not awful. It's definitely not gonna. It's not a negative on their team for sure. And then offensively, they got Josh Jacobs, who I think is a really, really talented running back. John Gruden has already come out and said he's irritated that Jacobs was not Rookie of the Year last year, and he said he's going to give Jacobs a ton of touches this year to kind of prove that Jacobs was deserving of the Rookie of the Year last year over Kyler Murray. And they got solid receivers, Tyrell Williams, who's already questionable with injuries already in camp. But if he can stay on the field, I think he's a talented receiver. As I mentioned, they added Ruggs III, who's a really fast rookie, and Gruden loves to run that fast offense. Hunter Renfrow is a decent receiver. Darren Waller's a good tight end. I mean, I think their offense is good. And as you already mentioned, they got a really good defense, really solid defense. I think it's going to keep them in these games. And obviously, I don't think they're going to be better than the Chiefs. But they're definitely, in my opinion, probably the second best team, at least on paper, in this division. I love the Broncos, and we'll talk about them in a second. But I really like this team. I think they're going to be in the playoff hunt for sure, and I like to think they're going to sneak into one of those final playoff spots. The big thing though is going to be if Derek Carr can be a good quarterback, and I tend to think he can. I think he at least has the potential to be a solid quarterback.
Yeah, he showed that one year he had a flash of hope for the franchise when they went 12-4, but obviously he couldn't make that playoff game because he got hurt. And reports coming out of camp saying that Mariota has been no threat to Carr. So it looks like it should be Carr's job to lose if he struggles or whatever. My heart wants me to believe that Marcus Mariota can pull something out of the bag and pull a Tannehill on what happened to him last year. That's possible. I think it's in the realm of possibility. But if they say that Carr's good to go, then he'll be good to go. Other than that, I do think they'll be able to compete as long as Carr's good to go. But I think he should be on a short leash because they've had him for quite a while now, and nothing to show for it. So if he has a bad season, they could possibly go quarterback in the draft next year.
Yeah, I like Derek Carr. I think he's a solid quarterback. I know some of the analytics and some of those outside numbers, they don't reflect great on him. But I think he's a solid quarterback. I think this doesn't mean anything on the football field, but he seems like a really nice guy as well. When I was watching Hard Knocks, he seemed like a really nice guy. But I do kind of have some concern there with Carr because I believe in the offseason they were trying to trade him, and reportedly Mariota was their guy, and they went like really hard after him in free agency. I was kind of in like the group of people saying that Mariota wasn't going to be a huge competitor for Carr, just because we've seen him in Tennessee. We've seen that kind of story run its course several times where Mariota is just not a great. I know you like him, Roman. Maybe you're hopeful that he's going to be good, but in my opinion, he's just not a good NFL quarterback. Even though he was an amazing college quarterback, so I think Carr's gonna win that job, and it kind of stinks because I kind of wanted Mariota to give him more of a battle and maybe kind of help him work and earn it a little bit more, and maybe kind of reach that next level because he was an MVP candidate that year that made the playoffs, and he of course got injured. I mean, he was in MVP talks before he got injured, and a lot of people forget about that. So I think if he can kind of reach that level again, I think it's gonna be really good. And this is probably the best offense he's had around him since that year, which I think is really important. I am interested to see what you think about Henry Ruggs, but I think that he was probably the third best receiver in this draft behind CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. But he went first out of those three guys. I still think he's a really talented prospect, but I kind of wish they would have went with a Jeudy or a CeeDee Lamb, but I still think Ruggs is going to be good. But I'm interested to hear what do you think about him?
Yeah, I honestly agree with you. I think I thought Jeudy was the best receiver coming out of the draft.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about him a little bit later. I think the Broncos got an absolute steal on him. But that's not a knock on Ruggs because he's still a great wide receiver, and the Raiders got a guy that they liked. That combined with their second first round pick, Damon Arnett, kind of made a little questionable draft day for him. But I think they both got guys that they wanted, and Ruggs is better than not drafting wide receiver at all. So
yeah.
Carr should take advantage of that. And obviously they got Lynn Bowden and Brian Edwards, so they're a completely young, reloaded wide receiver core. And if he doesn't take advantage of it now, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, if this is the make or break year for Carr, as I already mentioned, he was in trade talks this past season. I think if it doesn't work this year in Las Vegas, it's not going to be like the end of the world. But he's going to get another starting job somewhere for sure. But I think if he wants to make this work in Las Vegas and he wants to be the face of the Raiders here as they start a new era of their franchise, this is the year. Because as we already talked about. They have a really good offense, and I know I mentioned at the top about Josh Jacobs, but we cannot reiterate enough. I think Josh Jacobs is going to be really, really good. And if they can run the offense through Josh Jacobs, it's going to take a little bit more off Derek Carr. And I think it's really important. He's got a really good skill position group, and as you mentioned, they wanted Henry Ruggs and they got him. I just personally would have preferred them to have taken a Judy or a CeeDee Lamb, but Henry Ruggs is still a fine prospect, and I think they're going to be a good offense, and that's the big thing. If Derek Carr can be good, I think this is a playoff team. If Derek Carr is not good and can't get his skill position guys the ball, and maybe Josh Jacobs gets banged up, or somebody else gets banged up or whatever, this is probably going to be another 6-10, 5-11, 7-9 type of season for the Raiders, which would be a really big disappointment because as we can see here, they went all in. And they've gone on in the last 2 years, and John Gruden doesn't want to miss the playoffs again. I think this is his, third year as coach of the Raiders, and he doesn't want to miss the playoffs again for a third straight year after getting that enormous contract a couple seasons ago.
Yeah. I do want to touch on Josh Jacobs a little bit because I did say it in our NFC West episode. I did believe that he should have won Offensive Rookie of the Year over Kyler Murray, and I think Chris agreed with me on that. So if the rumors are true that Gruden wants to run him as many times as he can to prove to people that he deserves that award, then so be it. I certainly won't complain as a fantasy owner if I happen to get him. But one move that we didn't actually write on the document yet is that just a couple days ago they signed Riddick, who is a good pass catching back, but I don't think he'll take a lot of work from Jacobs. But if you were hoping from a massive breakout season from Josh Jacobs, it's still possible. But I wouldn't be surprised if Rick did get some third down work. But you never know. Yeah,
I mean, we've become all too familiar with Riddick because he was with the Lions for what felt like 15 years. And he's not going to – I'm not super concerned about Riddick taking a ton of touches away from Jacobs. He's got to take some, especially out of the passing game.
Right.
But in terms of just touches and running the ball, and I tend to buy the what Gruden's saying is that he wants to prove everybody because he just seems like that type of guy that would just – like he talks a lot, but I feel like more times than not, when he does talk, it's accurate and he's telling the truth. So I know Jacobs got banged up last year, and that's definitely a concern. So I think if he stays healthy, though, I think he could be one of the best running backs in the game for sure. We see these all the time. These guys who are really good their first year, then they take a huge step their second year. Kind of, we saw it with Christian McCaffrey. We saw it with a ton of these guys who just reached a new level. And then he was already really good last year. I agree with you and Chris. I think he should have been the Rookie of the Year over Kyler Murray. But he just kind of got banged up there down the stretch, and I think people kind of were out on him a little bit. But the defense, and I know we really haven't talked about the defense a whole lot, but I think they are a solid group. After looking, I know I said before they probably are one of the best in the division, but after looking at it now, it's good, it's solid. It's not tremendous, I don't think, but I still think it's really good. It's above average for sure. It's not going to lose them many games. Probably going to win them a couple of games as well. And the keys to this team is definitely going to be the offense, if they can score enough points to keep up with the other teams in this division.
Yeah, I completely agree. Their defense is still pretty young, so I'll give them some leeway if they regress a little bit, but the signings they made and the continual progression of those rookies, I think they have something to look forward to for sure.
Yeah, Cleveland Farrell, Jonathan Abram, who looked really good last year, then got hurt for pretty much the entire season. So I think they're going to be a fun group to watch. That's for sure. I mean, that's a given with the Raiders. The Raiders could go 1-15 and they'd still be entertaining just because of all the drama and off the field stuff with John Gruden being your head coach and all that. But I think they're going to be a really good team. They're definitely better than the Chargers, in my opinion, because I think they have a little bit of better offense and they still have a solid defense as well. But I do think after I know I started this segment off with a huge kind of high take, and I was like super high on the Raiders. After we're kind of talking it through, I think I like the Broncos a little bit more, but it definitely wouldn't surprise me if the Raiders go 10-6, 9-7, and make the playoffs. I mean, this is a team that's capable of that for sure. But
beautiful stadium, by the way. Beautiful
Yes.
stadium.
Did you? They also had. I saw they had this for season ticket holders because they obviously
Mhm.
they can't come. At least most likely won't be able to come this year. They got this cool like box and they opened it up and it was
Yeah.
like it had music. It had like the Raiders song. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's like Winds of Autumn or something like that. They had that song and they had like this really cool like stadium box thing of like
Mhm.
a replica of the stadium. If you haven't
Yeah.
looked at that, definitely check it out. It looks really cool. I wish the Lions would do something like that, but hey, we're not the Raiders, I guess. But I mean, this is a team though that I really wish they're good because they're very similar to like the Knicks in basketball. Like you hear about the Raiders all the time, similar to how you hear about the Knicks all the time, and even when they are terrible. So I really would prefer the Raiders to just be a good team, so we can talk about a good football team rather than talking about a mediocre to below average football team. And this is the first year since that year they made the playoffs that I feel really confident about this team's potential and this team's capability because I think they could make the playoffs, maybe even make a little noise if things bounce their way. So I think it's time to jump into fantasy picks. I'm going to go first because you got the gimme with the Chargers. So I'm going to get the gimme with the Raiders. It's Josh Jacobs. I don't really think I need to add a whole lot to what we already said about Jacobs. He's going to get a lot of touches this year. He's going kind of low in drafts because he didn't really get a lot of touches, especially in the passing game last year. So he's going a little bit lower, and I think he's got definite top 4, top 5 potential, maybe even top 3 potential in fantasy. And you can get him as like the RB 8, 9, 10 in most leagues, unless you have a guy who's really high on Josh Jacobs like I did, like Chris, even though he didn't take Josh Jacobs, but all his other friends are super into Josh Jacobs. So if you're in a other league though, Josh Jacobs is probably going to fall a little bit, and you can't really get like RB 1, 2, 3 potential out of the other guys he's going around, kind of in that Austin Eckler range. But yeah, he's going to get the touches. If he stays healthy, he's going to be an amazing fantasy option for sure.
I agree. There's too many good options at the back half of the first round, or early second, that you can't have them all. But I wish I did because they're all exciting.
Yes.
They all have the upside. And I think Jacobs is the only one of the specific group, I think, between like Drake, Sanders, Clyde. I think Jacobs
Yeah.
is the biggest chance to drop in drafts, a late first round. If you compare Jacobs
Yes.
with a Saquon or a Zeke Elliott, that's very ideal. And even in
Yeah.
our last mock draft, Chris got him in the third round. That's unheard of. But if that ever happens in your actual draft, steal him right away because that's a good value for him.
It is unheard of, but it's also not unheard of because it does happen. Like you can get him early third round, most likely. It seems like now because Gruden came out and said about how many touches Jacobs is going to get, and that seems like a lot of people like us are like Josh Jacobs is amazing, so he's creeping up the draft boards a little bit. But still, I mean, personally, I like him more than a guy like Dalvin Cook or Derrick Henry who's going above him. So
Yeah.
if you end up taking Michael Thomas with your first round pick. If you have like a higher first round pick, I mean, you could probably get him in the second round, Josh Jacobs, and that's like a really good duo. So,
And I know we kind of talked about the Theo Riddick signing, but I don't think that signing should fear you at all. You can draft him where he's going, and it'll still pay off as he would have without him on the field.
Yeah, and at that draft price, definitely take him, especially in PPR leagues too, because he is dropping a little bit in PPR leagues because he didn't have a ton of receptions last year. But if you're buying what Gruden's saying that he's going to be a huge part of the offense, both in terms of running and receiving, take Jacobs wherever you can get him for sure. So as I said, I kind of stole this one because this is a team very much like the Chargers, at least in my opinion, where they got one clear-cut guy. But I'm interested to hear who's your fantasy pick for the Raiders.
I'm actually going to pull a page out of Chris's book and do a little bit of an anti-draft as well as a do draft. So I'm going to talk about Darren Waller a little bit, and he's usually the fourth tight end, fifth tight end going off the board, mid rounds, or if someone might reach for him in the early couple of rounds. You might see Kittle, Kelsey, Andrews go off the board. Don't be concerned with that because that's where they're supposed to go, and don't reach on Waller, especially with all the tight ends that are late that we all love so much. There's no need to draft a tight end in the middle rounds. You should be able to wait throughout that few stretches and get some good values as opposed to taking a tight end who it's going to be a crowded offense, I believe. So I'm not for him this season, but if you want to wait until he goes a couple rounds past his ADP, that's not necessarily a bad option. But the guy I'm going to talk about as your do draft player is Henry Ruggs, because even though he was the first wide receiver off the board in the actual draft, he's not going to be the first off in fantasy drafts. I've seen CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Ayuk, Jerry Jeudy go off the board ahead of him.
Jalen Reagor.
Yep, Jalen Reagor, Jefferson. It just depends. It can fluctuate any day. But Regs is not going to be the first rookie off the board in terms of wide receivers. So if you want to grab him late in drafts and had some depth but high upside, then I definitely recommend that. You take a flyer on a bunch of rookies in that range, but Ruggs will be there, and I think he's going to be pay off dividends. He's not going to go undrafted, I don't think, but if you want to get him like the 12th, 13th round, definitely go for it.
Yeah, I agree with both those things. I think I've said this before. I think if you miss out on Kittle and Kelsey, just kind of wait on tight end, because even I know a lot of people love Mark Andrews, and I think Mark Andrews is a solid fantasy option, but I feel like the drop off from Andrews to the rest of the tight ends is not as big as the drop off from Kittle and Kelsey to Andrews. So, and especially with Waller, who like you said, is going in that like mid round range for the most part. He's typically like the 4th, 5th tight end off the board. I'd rather just wait, because the fall off from Waller to a guy like Hunter Henry, like we mentioned before, or Hayden Hurst, some guys you can get later in drafts, is not that big in comparison to like the Kittle, Kelsey to Andrews, Waller range. So 100% agree with you that. And then I also 100% agree with you with Henry Ruggs. The upside is obviously there. Gruden has also come out and said how he was going to give Ruggs the ball a lot. They're going to go a lot downfield. It's of course a question of whether or not Derek Carr can throw the deep ball to Henry Ruggs. But if he can, Henry Ruggs is probably going to get a lot of big plays, a lot of big scoring plays for sure. And the potential's there, and the draft price is next to nothing pretty much. So you can take him as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, maybe even wide receiver 6, who knows, and still get some really, really solid upside. And if he doesn't pan out, I mean, it is what it is, right? You're taking, it's like your second to last pick or whatever. So I completely agree with both of your fantasy picks there, Roman. Any other final Raiders kind of takes, or do you want to jump into another super interesting team in the Denver Broncos?
No, I think we got it all for the Raiders. They're an exciting team, new stadium, new city, but in terms of their production compared to other teams in the division, I don't think it'll be quite as high.
Yeah, for sure. Hope they're good though, especially once they get fans in that stadium, because as you mentioned, we've shown with the Vegas Golden Knights in the NHL, Vegas is a good sports town, and that stadium is beautiful, and I think it deserves a solid football team, and I think this team has potential to be it, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But let's jump into the Denver Broncos here, a team last year who finished 7-9 kind of quietly. I kind of thought they were a lot worse than 7-9, if I'm being honest. Before I kind of started doing some research for this episode, they didn't have a great offense, but they did have a really kind of underrated defense, as we've kind of become accustomed to with the Denver Broncos ever since they won the Super Bowl a few years ago. They had a good defense, just kind of a few question marks at offense, but then Drew Lock took over at quarterback for, I think, the last 5 games and really showed some flashes of promise and has a lot of people super excited about the Broncos. They're like a super like hipster, sexy pick to be like a dark horse playoff contender, maybe give the Chiefs a run for their money. I see a lot of experts saying, look out for the Broncos, look out for the Broncos. And I'm interested to hear, as you can see, I have my Broncos hat on. I tend to think that they're going to be a really good team, but I'm interested to hear kind of what you think about them as well. It sounds like you're probably going to be kind of high on them as well. In terms of additions, they added running back Melvin Gordon from division rival Los Angeles. They also added cornerback A.J. Bouye, offensive guard, former Michigan offensive guard Graham Glasgow, tight end Nick Vannett, defensive tackle Jarrell Casey, and offensive tackle DeMar Dotson. They lost a lot of players, but not ton of at least talent, at least in my opinion. They lost center Connor McGovern to the New York Jets, cornerback Chris Harris to the Chargers, who that was actually a big loss. Fullback Andy Janovich to the Browns, defensive end Derek Wolfe to the Ravens, quarterback Joe Flacco to the Jets. I completely forgot he signed with the Jets. Quarterback Brandon Allen to the Bengals, safety Will Parks to the Eagles, running back Devontae Booker to the Raiders, defensive end Adam Gotsis to the Jaguars, and then they had both Jawan James and Kyle Pecco both opt out of the season. And in the draft, we kind of mentioned it when we were talking about the Raiders. They got kind of a really big steal by taking Jerry Jeudy with their first-round pick, which was 15th overall, the wide receiver out of Alabama. I saw a lot of mocks had him going top 10, and he kind of dropped him along with CeeDee Lamb, who went even lower than Jerry Jeudy did. And then in the second round, they took another receiver, KJ Hamler out of Penn State, and then they spent their 3 third-round picks on Michael Ojemudia, the cornerback out of Iowa, Lloyd Cushenberry, the center out of LSU, and then McTelvin Agim, defensive tackle out of Arkansas. As I said, this is a team that has a lot of hype around them this year. They're not as much as the Browns had a season ago, but still a lot of hype around this team. A lot of people think they're going to be really good this year. What do you think, Roman? Are you buying the hype, or are you kind of like, this team is a little bit overrated?
I am buying the hype. I know they finished 7-9, which is still a decent record, but you have to realize at the beginning of the season they had Flacco and he got hurt. They had Brandon Allen, he didn't do it well. And then once they actually put Drew Lock in, then they started to perform and the offense started rolling. So I do believe that will carry on to this season with a lot more weapons, They bulked up on offense quite a bit. And obviously they're not going to win the division, I don't think, but they could possibly steal a game from the Chiefs, but they'll definitely be in the wild card. Not to spoil my standing predictions later on.
Yeah, I agree. This is when I said that I was kind of like, I'm kind of not as high on the Raiders as I thought I was. That's because I looked at this Broncos team, and I mean, they got a lot of good pieces. Obviously, they had a really good defense last year that kind of went unnoticed because they had Von Miller, they had Bradley Chubb, two really good players, Jarrell Casey. This is a good defense, and as you mentioned, they added a ton of pieces in the offseason in the offensive department. Jerry Jeudy, who I think could be a wide receiver one. They already had Cortland Sutton from last year, who was kind of the silver lining. He was pretty good offensively. They added Melvin Gordon. They already had Phillip Lindsay. I mean, that's two really good running backs. I think Lindsay would start for a lot of teams, but he's their backup. Noah Fant is a good tight end, has a lot of potential. They had a Glasgow who's a good offensive line piece, and they have a solid offensive line, I think, now. I think this team is going to be really good. It's just the big question mark for me, at least, and this is going to sound like a broken record because I feel like I've said this about every team in this division, is Drew Lock going to be a good quarterback? Because I feel like it's kind of funny now that I'm thinking about it, because with the Chargers, the Raiders, and now the Broncos, they all have really solid skill position players outside of quarterback. And I think similar to Herbert, similar to Carr, I think Locke has the potential to be a really good quarterback. Just there's some question marks there because we just haven't seen it before. I know he was solid down the stretch, but that was 5 games, right? I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, remember, he was like going to be the MVP of the league when he first came over to San Francisco in those last 5 games, went undefeated. And now people are completely out on Jimmy Garoppolo. So it's a super small sample size, but do you believe in Drew Lock? Obviously, I kind of like him because he has a great first name, but do you believe in Drew Lock?
I really do, and I hope he would be able to take a step forward with the many other weapons they added. Hopefully, I think their offense is going to hinder on the progression of Noah Fant as well, who had a decent rookie season, but normally by now they should be able to take that step forward and dominate, even though they have many other weapons. So I do think Locke will spread the ball, and I think this is sort of a situation like Baker Mayfield in his second year. They both had good rookie seasons, but they need to take that step forward. Baker Mayfield didn't, which was kind of the reason they didn't have a good season. And I think that could be the same case with the Broncos. But I do hope that Drew Lock does make that step forward, improve, spread the ball, and obviously with a better defense than Cleveland had at the time, Denver should be able to win a lot of games.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's what I was going to say too, is that the difference between them and the Browns, I think, is that even if Drew Lock is as bad as Baker Mayfield was last year, I still think this defense is going to win them some games. I mean, we saw last year they had not great quarterback play, and they're trucking out. Who'd they truck out? Joe Flacco, and then somebody else too. And then Drew Lock obviously eventually took over, which was not great, and they still went 7-9, which is not obviously not making the playoffs, but it's respectable. It's not awful. So I think Drew Lock, the thing with Drew Lock is Baker Mayfield had a ton of pressure on him. I think with Lock, he has pressure, obviously. As I've said, this is a team that everyone's really high on this year. But I don't feel like he has as much pressure on him because of how good the defense is. And he doesn't need to be an MVP type of guy. He just has to be league average, maybe slightly above league average. And this team is going to win probably 9 to 11 games, I would say. if he's just a solid quarterback, gets the ball to Melvin Gordon, who I think a lot of people are sleeping on this year, gets the ball to Jerry Jeudy. KJ Hamler's a solid receiver out of the second round. We already mentioned they had Cortland Sutton. I think Noah Fant, I think he could really take a serious step forward this year. Not to spoil my fantasy pick, but I think he's a good guy you can take a flyer on and maybe even get him. You can get him super late, maybe even get him undrafted in fantasy leagues. We're not talking about fantasy right now, though. I just really like this team, and I think if Drew Lock just doesn't put a bunch of pressure on him, is just solid, especially because we look at after Peyton Manning, this team has had no good quarterbacks at all. So there's really not a lot of pressure there. He just has to make his throws, be average, be slightly above league average, do what he can, and I think this team is gonna make the playoffs for sure.
Yeah, John Elway kind of messed up a lot of quarterback picks after Peyton Manning, Paxton Lynch most notably in the first round. They had Simeon, they had Osweiler. But
that was the guy, Trevor Simeon. I was like, what's that guy's name? Trevor Simeon. That was the guy I was thinking of.
But I think they have their franchise guy now in Drew Lock, and I think Elway can have a sigh of relief because he got this one right.
Yeah, I mean, Elway wasn't going to get fired anyway because they just worship Elway for good reason. He brought him 2 Super Bowls and is one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But there was some kind of like, is Elway really a good GM? But now that I think Drew Lock, he's going to be okay enough. He's going to be good enough. The pieces are there. If they can stay healthy, I think this team is going to be really good. And the defense, they added AJ Bouye, who's a good cornerback, I think. I already mentioned Chubb, Miller, Casey. They got Bryce Callahan. They got a good defense, I think, and it's going to keep them in every game. And it's just going to be up to Lock to make those few, big throws late in the game to lead a team to victory. And I think they're going to make the playoffs. I really believe they're going to make the playoffs. I'm interested to hear though. So Melvin Gordon, I kind of alluded to it at the top. He's a guy who it seems like a lot of people are kind of out on. He did not have a good year last year because of he started late because he was mad about his contract, and now he ends up here in Denver. Do you think he's going to be this? Is he the same Melvin Gordon we saw 2 years ago that was one of the best running backs in the league, or do you think he's going to be more of the guy we saw last year where he's just not that great?
I wish I had a solid answer for that, but I think considering that he's kind of in the same situation at least where there is a good serviceable backup behind him in Phillip Lindsay, who wasn't a Pro Bowler a couple years ago. So I don't think he's going to necessarily go away. And if they want to do a timeshare to keep Gordon healthy, at least he's still talented, I believe, in non-fantasy related purposes. He is a talented running back, but kind of like the same thing with the whole offense. Really, there's a lot of mouths to feed, and everyone will get their fair share. And they're all talented, but it might not be good enough for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I sticking to real life football here for a second. I like Melvin Gordon. I think he's going to have a solid season. I think people kind of overlook the fact that he did not have a full off season last year because he was negotiating his contract. And I think if he kind of just focuses a little bit more, and since by all accounts he seems like to be having a solid training camp so far this season, I think he's going to be a really good running back. As I already mentioned, their offensive line is solid. And I think there are a lot of mouths to feed, but there were also a lot of mouths to feed when he was with Los Angeles or San Diego, whatever they were back when he had his really good season. And I think he's going to have another solid year this year. And he had Austin Eckler behind him in Los Angeles / San Diego, and he's got Phillip Lindsay. And I think Eckler's better than Lindsay personally.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think he's gonna have a good season, and then Jerry Jeudy too. Do you think he's gonna have a good season? Obviously, I think you said you think he's like the best receiver out of this year's draft class, right?
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, I agree. He's gonna be good, and I think he also has I think Ruggs is going to have a lot of touches. CeeDee Lamb, I think he's really talented, but that offense is just insane. But I think Jeudy has a legitimate potential to maybe be like the 1B to Cortland Sutton's 1A. I think they're both going to be really good in this offense for sure. But this is a team I'm super excited about. I'm actually more excited about them now as we keep talking about them. So I just hope they can live up to the hype, and Locke can be a really solid quarterback because he looked really good last year down the stretch, but it's just super small sample size, but he's got the team around him to succeed. So hopefully he does. Hopefully they can at least compete with the Chiefs. I don't think they're going to be better than the Chiefs, but I just want to see the Chiefs at least get some sort. I guess the Chargers were pretty good a couple years ago, but just see someone maybe make the Chiefs kind of think twice about whether or not they're going to win this division or not. But any other kind of thoughts or questions you want to talk about the Broncos, or did you want to jump right into your fantasy pick?
No, I can just jump right into my fantasy pick, and there's a few good options, a lot early, a lot late. But I'm gonna talk about Courtland Sutton for a little bit, who we didn't really talk about as much up until this point. I know before the draft, obviously, he was getting very hyped up because of his performances, and then he was going, I think, in drafts like maybe third, fourth round. But after the draft, they kind of realized that he definitely might not be the lead wide receiver, or he still will be the wide receiver one, but it won't be clear cut anymore with Jerry Jeudy and Hamler and many other weapons in the field. But I do think that since Hamler kind of went down with an injury in camp and he's still week to week, we haven't had many updates on him. I think the hype for Courtland Sutton is starting to come back up. And even though his ADP won't rise a little bit, you can still get him mid rounds, even behind guys like Woods or AJ Brown or Metcalf. It'll go later than them. Because many people thought he wouldn't necessarily live or play like he did last season. But if you want to get him as a wide receiver 2 or flex option, I think that'll be good for that you and good for the team.
Yeah, Sutton's the guy who I think he's actually going to get some touches because I know the one kind of question mark I would say for this team is their wide receiver 3. Because currently it's listed as Tim Patrick, who is still kind of a relative unknown. KJ Hamler, as you said, went down with an injury. So that's kind of a concern a little bit, at least, for this team. So I think it's definitely going to be, in terms of receiving, I mean, Noah Fant is a good tight end. Is going to take some targets away, but it's going to be very much Sutton and Jeudy are going to be the two guys that get the most targets, at least out of the receiving core. Because you don't really have that clear-cut wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 guy that'll take some targets away. So I still think Sutton's going to be a really good option, even if Jeudy is as good as we think he's going to be. At the same time, though, I've seen some leagues where Sutton gets taken as like the clear-cut wide receiver 1, and I'm kind of just like, no, thank you. I don't need that. But if he drops and is going kind of where you say he goes, typically as like a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, I think I'm all over that. He's going to be I think he's got definitely upside, but if you're taking him as your wide receiver 1, please don't do that. That's not a good idea.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'll jump into my pick here. I kind of teased that I was going to say somebody else, but I'm not going to say that person anymore. I think I'll go Melvin Gordon. I like Melvin Gordon a lot. I think he's going to be his draft price because he's still talented. And what Chris and I said in our fantasy when we did our running back rankings video is that people are like super out on him, but yet he still has the potential to be really good. We saw it in the past. He was good with the Chargers. He's healthy now. He's had a solid training camp. He's had a full training camp, unlike he did last year. I think he's going to be a really good option, kind of like how he was last year or 2 years ago. I mean, and you can get him in that range with like Le'Veon Bell, which I kind of like a little bit more, but like David Johnson, Todd Gurley. I like Melvin Gordon. Him and Le'Veon Bell in that kind of group of guys, I think have the highest floors, and I also think they have the potential to be really, really good. So I'm all in on taking Melvin Gordon. I don't think I've unfortunately not been able to get him on any of my teams at the moment, but I still think he's a really good option for sure.
Me personally, I'm not as high on him, and I don't plan on actively drafting him in my drafts. But I know I can see your case for drafting him, considering where he's being drafted around and who else is available. But I think I mentioned this a few times before, but I know there's a few running backs who I'd prefer over Melvin Gordon considerably, Gurley or Carson, who you or Chris weren't necessarily high on. But yeah. For me, it's just a situation and the uncertainty of how he'll be used in the offense right away. Yeah, I'm sure he'll live up to solid standards as a running back 2, because that's where he's being drafted at. If you have him as your running back 1, I think you're in trouble. But he can definitely produce, and I see a scenario with him producing in the sense that you're living up to his expectations, Drew. But for me, I'm not gonna be actively drafting him.
Yeah, I respect that. I get that. Personally, I mean, Todd Gurley, he's already kind of limping, which kind of is a red flag for me at least. Mm-hmm. And then kind of the same thing with Chris Carson. He's coming off that hip injury, and I'm a little concerned about that. So that's why I like Melvin Gordon a little bit more. But you can take him as like your RB2, even like your RB3 in some leagues if he drops a little bit. And I'm all over that because I think the potential is there for him to be your RB1. And even in worst case scenario, he's a solid RB2, RB3. I think the floor is higher on him than I think you tend to think, because I do think he's going to get enough touches. I think Philip Lindsay's going to take some, but we saw he was still a fantasy viable option with Austin Eckler backing him up. So I like him. And this team, honestly, is very dissimilar to the Raiders and the Chargers in that there are several really good fantasy options. Already mentioned, you said Sutton, I said Gordon, but there's also Jerry Judy's good. Noah Fant is good. Even if you want to take a flyer on Drew Lock, I think he's going to be really good. Even Phillip Lindsay, I think he's still going to have a role in this offense, despite the addition of Melvin Gordon. So a lot of good fantasy options, and the draft price really is not super high on really any of them, which is really good. So really good fantasy team, and also I think really going to be a really good real life team as well. Any final thoughts on the Broncos before we dive into the last team that we're going to talk about today?
No, I think we said all we needed to say, and expectations I think are considerably high for the roster that they have.
Yeah, I think they're going to be really good and definitely give the next team, the final team, the Kansas City Chiefs, a run for their money. So obviously, unless you lived under a rock, the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl. The San Francisco 49ers and Kyle Shanahan choked yet again, and the Chiefs were all over it. Patrick Mahomes had kind of a not great game, but still won the Super Bowl MVP, made that amazing play to Tyreek Hill. I think it was like a 40-yard reception. That really kind of turned the tide of that Super Bowl, and of course ended up winning the game. So yeah, they were obviously probably could have, would have won the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Eventually won it obviously last year, and they probably can win it again this year, and probably for the foreseeable future with Patrick Mahomes being there for 10 years now, right? And Andy Reid, one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in the entire NFL. And they also had a good draft, had some good additions, didn't lose a whole lot. So they're going to be really good again this year. But let's jump into the additions real quick. They added offensive tackle Mike Remmers, running back DeAndre Washington, cornerback Antonio Hamilton, tight end Ricky Seals-Jones, safety Tedrick Thompson, and defensive end Taco Charlton, also a Michigan alum. In terms of subtractions, they lost cornerback Kendall Fuller to the Washington football team. Defensive end Emmanuel Ogbah to the Dolphins. Offensive guards Stefan Wisniewski to the Steelers. Offensive tackle Cameron Irving to the Cowboys. Tight end Blake Bell also to the Cowboys. Running back LaShawn McCoy to the Buccaneers. Linebacker Reggie Ragland to the Lions. Linebacker Terrell Suggs, who's currently still a free agent. And then they had 3 opt-outs, most notably running back Damian Williams, who's also really good in that Super Bowl. Offensive guard Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, and offensive tackle Lucas Niang. And then in terms of the draft, they only had 6 picks, but they made the most of those picks because in the first round they took the first running back off the board, pick 32 overall, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the running back out of LSU, a guy who might be the most hyped rookie out of any rookie this year, outside of maybe Tua, and maybe Joe Burrow as well. But then in the second round, they took Willie Gay Jr., the linebacker out of Mississippi State, and then they also took Lucas Niang in the third round, but obviously, as I mentioned before, he did opt out. So this is a team, as I said, they're coming off a Super Bowl, their first Super Bowl since I think 1970, the first Super Bowl of Andy Reid's illustrious career. But I think, honestly, even though it took them that long to win a Super Bowl, I think this is a team that is more than capable of winning it again. What do you think, though? Do you think the Chiefs, are they going to be kind of like the new Patriots here, where we're just going to see the Chiefs in like the AFC Championship game for the next 15 years? Or are you maybe not buying the hype? Do you think the Chiefs are going to regress a little bit this year?
I think the Chiefs are going to be a more likable Patriots dynasty, I guess you could say.
Well,
because
I like the Patriots, so I guess we'll have to agree to disagree.
But yeah, the Chiefs should already book their tickets to Tampa Bay for the Super Bowl because I think it's a lock for them in the AFC at least. They had considerably good additions to the team, and the addition of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and notably that Damian Williams opt out, he should be there for a big season. And they didn't really lose much on offense at least, but on defense they did lose some pieces, but that won't matter considering they have Mahomes and they can be in shootouts and score 40 plus any game of the week.
Yeah, I mean, injuries are kind of a concern, I guess, because Mahomes was injured last year. Obviously, it didn't affect them that much because they won this freaking Super Bowl. But also Tyreek Hill and Sammy Watkins, their top 2 wide receivers, are already listed as questionable currently on their depth chart. And they've kind of had flare-ups here and there in the past. They have a solid offensive line, but not amazing. And you already mentioned there they did lose some pieces on defense. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, this offense is just nuts. And I mean, the fact that they had their starting running back, one of the stars of the Super Bowl last year, opt out, and they insert him. They basically upgrade, in my opinion, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, I know Chris is probably the highest out of any of us on him, but I'm also super high on him. I think he's going to be really, really good this year. We saw what Kareem Hunt did in his rookie year, and I think Edwards-Helaire is probably more talented than Kareem Hunt. So this is just going to be – they're going to put up a ton of points. Travis Kelce, we haven't even mentioned Travis Kelce. I mean, probably one of, if not the best tight end in the entire league. The only guy that would be better than him would be George Kittle. And the defense, it's not like amazing, but they still got Tyrann Mathieu. They got Frank Clark. As I mentioned, they had Willie Gay Jr., Chris Jones. They gave him that big contract. I think they're going to be good enough to not – I know a couple years ago they were really not good at all, and the Chiefs just had to like score like 47 points every game to win games. I don't think they're that bad. I think they are going to keep the Chiefs – they're not going to lose the Chiefs any games. They're definitely not going to win them any games, but they're going to keep them in each game and allow the Chiefs to score only 35 points and win pretty comfortably on a week-to-week basis. But I'm right there with you. I think Chris was the one, so I wish we could kind of hear his take on the Chiefs. But Chris was the one that said the Ravens are going to win the AFC, I believe, in our AFC North episode. And I think I'm right there with you, though. I think the Chiefs are the clear-cut number one team in this division and in the entire conference.
I mean, just to touch on that defense a little bit, we've seen the defense struggle. They were down literally 20-plus points in both of their playoff games in the AFC divisional and the conference championship. But obviously, you can't. There's nothing you can do about it because Mahomes is going to come back and then win you the game. So, like, teams have probably figured out how to stop the defense, but the offense, they're just going to come back into games, and it's just unfortunate for everyone else because there's no way to stop them really.
Yeah, and it wasn't just in the Super Bowl either. I mean, we saw it against the Texans in the divisional round. We saw it against the Titans in the conference championship game. I mean, this offense is unstoppable. And if the one thing, and I was kind of like, Patrick Mahomes is not going to have as good of a year in 2019 as he did in 2018, right? And I guess he didn't win the MVP, and yes, he got injured, but he was still really, really good. And now I feel like he kind of wants to prove that contract. I mean, I guess you worry about a little bit of fall off with the offense, but they just have so many pieces. By far, hands down, the best offense in the league. And it's just going to be a matter of, can a team either slow them down, as we saw with the Patriots 2 years ago in the AFC Championship game, enough to at least win, 35-28 or something like that, or is there an offense that has the potential to keep up with these Chiefs? Because as you said, even if you can score against them, you can score like 28 points, 35 points against this defense, which does have some serious holes. That doesn't mean that the Chiefs are not going to be able to easily score 52-60 or whatever. So do you think there's any team out there that has the offensive capability and maybe a solid enough defense to keep up with the Chiefs?
I think the Ravens are the closest team I can think of, but there's no one in the NFC that can probably give them a run for their money in any Super Bowl game.
Yeah, I like the Saints. I feel like they could probably maybe slow them down enough, as long as maybe Drew Brees, depending on how good he is this year. The Niners, I mean, obviously the Niners, I mean, they choked. They choked last year. I mean, they should have won that Super Bowl. And I think they're still a really good team. So I think they have the capability of doing it. I think the Ravens are probably the clear-cut team that has the most likelihood of doing that against the Chiefs in the AFC at least. Maybe the Patriots, if you believe in Cam Newton. Maybe they did it before. Maybe they can do it again. Who knows? They had way too many opt-outs on defense. But but the fact of the matter that we're talking more about what teams can beat the Chiefs instead of actually talking about the actual Chiefs is just because they are so good. And I feel like we spent the entire last two off seasons talking about how great the Chiefs are, that I feel like neither of us can offer anything more besides saying, Mahomes is good, Kelsey's good, Edwards-Helaire is good. And that just the fact that we're trying to find teams that can beat them should just be a testament to how really good and solid this team is going to be yet again. I think they've been good ever since Alex Smith showed up there a couple years ago. They've been a really good team, and it was nice to see them finally win the Super Bowl. And I think that they have an incredible shot at doing it again, because I think they are the best team in the league.
Yeah, I just want to mention that even though Alex Smith wasn't on the team last year, I think they are going to send him a ring, though, which I think is very nice of them, considering that he was there for the long haul with them in getting their, I guess not consider rebuild, but he was there for the years leading up to Mahomes. So I think that was a nice gesture. And I want to point out that, Mahomes did have a lot of ifs going into the draft, going in his rookie year. But now I think they're all going to turn into wins, like when he wins multiple Super Bowls, when he goes to the Hall of Fame. So, and just how
He
quick,
wins multiple MVPs, all that stuff.
yeah, just how quickly things can turn in a year and a half. So, the Chiefs are the team to beat, and there's no doubt about it.
I guess the one thing that you would worry about with Mahomes is like you look at Dan Marino, right? He made the Super Bowl when he was super young, lost, and then never went back, right? So I guess you look at there's no such thing as a sure thing. I mean, Mahomes could tear his ACL, break his arm right now as we're talking in training camp. You never know, but Mahomes is probably the closest thing to a sure thing that at least I can think of in terms of the NFL ever since I've been watching the NFL, which has been almost 20 years now. So he is just a super talented player, super fun to watch, a great ambassador for the NFL as a whole. And I hope he's successful. I don't love seeing the same team win all the time, but it'd be kind of cool to see them win yet again. And I think they definitely have the capabilities to do so. But there are some teams out there that I think can keep up with them, or at least have the defense to maybe slow them down enough. But at the same time, I mean, especially with Edwards-Helaire, I think their one kind of weakness, I would say, even though Damian Williams, I think, still was respectable last year, was their running back spot. And then they added a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and now they're going to be just really good. Really no holes on offense at all, aside from maybe the injuries concern. But that's with every team. They're going to be super fun to watch this year yet again. But
I don't know about you, but when in real time when they made that pick at 32, I was thinking they could pick like Swift or Taylor, because that's who I thought were the best running backs in the class. But considering what came out after the draft about how they want to use Clyde and how he fits his scheme and how it reminds Andy Reid of Brian Westbrook, I think that is the perfect fit for them, and ultimately the right choice.
Yeah, I Jonathan Taylor, I'm a little bit more out on, I think, than you are, and just judging by like our fantasy mock draft that we did, you were a little bit higher on Taylor, especially for this offense. I feel like Edwards-Helaire is just the perfect mix for this offense in terms of his pass catching capabilities. And we already saw how good he was last year in a record-breaking offense with LSU. Mm-hmm. And that's now he went from one record-breaking offense to another record-breaking offense. So it's got to be just a great time to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I mean, he could probably win a national championship and a Super Bowl in like a year, basically, which is just absolutely insane. But yeah, I would say Swift would also have been a good pick for there, because I think he does offer a lot in the passing game. But yeah, Edwards-Helaire was still a really solid pick. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. I see what you're saying there. At the time, I was kind of surprised at least a little bit that they took Swift. I was hopeful they took Swift, and the Lions could have got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but whatever. I personally like Edwards-Helaire a little bit more than Swift, but they're both solid prospects.
They certainly did their due diligence on him, and it's not our opinions don't matter as long as they're comfortable with it, and they're still happy with the pick.
Yeah, and Brian Westbrook, I mean, he's one of the most underrated running backs, I think, of the last 20 years, right? He was really good for the Eagles back in the 2000s. So if Andy Reid is saying he's the next Brian Westbrook or whatever, I know some people are like, who the heck is Brian Westbrook? But he's
high praise.
Yeah, he's going to be a good running back in this league for sure. But anything else about the Chiefs besides us just gushing about how great they are, or do you want to jump into fantasy picks here? Because this team is like, there are so many fantasy picks.
Real quickly, you kind of mentioned Sammy Watkins earlier, and I think this year he will have a step back in his role on the team, but that shouldn't be a big problem considering they drafted Mecole Hardman sort of as a Tyreek Hill replacement. But now that they have both now on the field, that they'll be a lot faster, they'll be a lot younger, and Watkins doesn't have to do as much, because he kind of hinted already that he's not going to have a big role. He's sort of on the edge of retirement, but not really. But he'll just be there and not take up a lot of touches, I believe.
Yeah, he reportedly took, I think, less money and a lesser role to stay with Kansas City, basically. Like, I guess there was, I don't think it ever came out for what teams, but I do know that there was better offers reportedly on the table, and he elected to stay with the Chiefs for less money. So, yeah, I mean, I still think he's going to be solid, but even if he doesn't have a good year and regresses a little bit, they still got Mecole Hardman, as you said. They got DeMarcus Robinson as well, who I think is a solid receiver. And even Ricky Seals-Jones is their backup tight end. I mean, he'd be a starting tight end on a lot of teams. It just so happens they have Travis Kelce, and Travis Kelce, I mean, he's basically a wide receiver. Like, let's just be honest, right? He's the amount of production he produces on a year-to-year basis, he's basically a receiver. So they're pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So I think I'm starting with the fantasy picks here, because I believe Yeah, because you did the Broncos. So I'm starting here with the Chiefs. As I mentioned, I said the Broncos were a little bit different than the Raiders and the Chargers. This team is way different than the Chargers and the Raiders because they have so many options, and we could just talk about so many guys. But I think I'm going to double down here on Clyde Edwards-Helaire just because he shot up draft boards a few weeks ago when Dame Lewis decided to opt out. So now – if you had your draft back in like July, you probably could have got Edwards-Helaire in like the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, kind of in that DeAndre Swift range, which that's just absolutely nuts because he's like going to be a top 10 running back this year. So if you draft him as like your RB3, good for you. And then maybe that's a sign maybe people should do more early drafts, but who knows? But now because he's the clear-cut number 1 guy there, and all reports in camp suggest that he's just really, really good. He is like kind of that like the back end of the 1st round, beginning of the 2nd round kind of guy. And much like Josh Jacobs, and I think Clyde is going a little bit higher than Josh Jacobs, but much like Josh Jacobs, I think Edwards-Helaire, he's a guy that I'd be all over at that range because he has potential to be maybe the running back 1. I mean, we saw what Kareem Hunt did a couple of years ago in this offense, and I think Edwards-Helaire is a better running back than Kareem Hunt. So I'm all over Clyde Edwards-Helaire in drafts. Him and Josh Jacobs are my 2 really top running back in terms of value for sure, because they both offer a lot of value, especially at their draft price. So you're going to have to spend a high pick on Edwards-Helaire, your 1st or 2nd round pick, maybe the 3rd round pick if people have been living under a rock for the last few weeks and not hearing all this hype about Clyde. But he's definitely going to be worth it. I mean, he's going to be a really, really good running back, especially in terms of fantasy and especially in terms of this offense.
Yeah, like you said, I'm super jealous of the fantasy owners who had Clyde as a running back 3 or maybe on the bench. That's insane. But now I'm gonna take a 1st round pick on him. I will spend that on him. If I get like the 7th, 8th, or 9th pick in the draft, maybe if I can get 10 and double up with Clyde and Sanders, that could be very ideal for me. But yeah, I do want to propose the idea that, like you kind of said, if you're living under a rock, you're not paying attention to all this news, that, maybe Clyde could fall in the 2nd round because, you'll see his name and be like, who's this guy? I thought Damian Williams was a starter.
Yeah.
So, it could possibly happen, fall to the 2nd round, and that would be a steal there as well. But most times, more than likely than not, he will be going in the 1st round, but I have no problem with that at all.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll be honest, I'm kind of one of those players that kind of likes to maybe not take the hot shot rookie just because he is unknown, right? And you might want to take a guy like a Dalvin Cook's still kind of an unknown as well because of his injuries, but a guy like, I don't know, Derrick Henry or someone that you might know like what he's going to offer you a little bit more than a Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But this guy, I mean, I think he's the closest thing to a sure thing in terms of rookie since like a Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott. He's in that tier of like, this guy's going to be really good, even though he's a rookie. So just kind of do away with your maybe insecurities about maybe not taking a rookie with your 1st or 2nd round pick, but just take this guy because he's going to be a really good running back for years to come, but especially this year. And you're not going to be able to get him in the 2nd round for years to come for sure.
Yeah, he's a league winner for sure, especially if you got him in the 3rd round. But if he doesn't perform as well, he could also be a league loser, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I know you said you kind of saw him a lot of times in like that 1st round. A lot of the drafts I've seen, he seems to be going in that like very like late 1st round, like 9th, 10th overall through like the late 2nd and maybe even early 3rd I've seen in some drafts. So if you can get him there as like your 3rd player off the board, I mean, that's nuts. But he's most likely going to be in that 2nd round. And I think he offers way more upside, a lot more upside than a lot of the other guys he's being taken around. So could be a league loser, but I tend to think his floor is relatively high for sure.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested to see, though, who's your pick? Because there are a lot of times we do these and then you take one guy and everyone's like, oh, man, and then you're grasping at straws here. But this offense has so many other options you could take. So who are you taking?
I wish we had like 3 more people on this episode to talk about everyone. So it's just going to put me in a weird position. Oh, man. There's a lot of great options, but they're all going really early, I guess you could say. Whether it's Travis Kelce or Mahomes or Tyreek Hill, they're all going within the first 3 rounds. And we kind of preach draft quarterback and tight end late. So, but obviously there's the exceptions if you want to get Travis or Mahomes or Hill in the late 1st, early 2nd. So I'm just going to give you like a vague statement and just say, like, if you want any of those 3, you're going to have to get them in the first couple of rounds. And obviously you could have a potential league winner in Mahomes as opposed to maybe risking a flyer guy at the very end. But more times than not, I will be drafting tight end and quarterback late. But obviously, if you want to go for the home run pick, take Mahomes, take Kelsey, take Hill. Obviously, there's going to be those guys that'll take him in the first round, which I think is a bit unnecessary, which is a bit early. Definitely going to be there in home leagues. I wouldn't be surprised if Mahomes went first overall in some leagues. But if you want to be a little smart about it, if he happens to fall in the late third, early fourth, I think that's a good time for Mahomes to go. Kelsey, late second, early third. Not necessarily huge drops from their ADP, but good enough for me to take them and feel confident about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Patrick Mahomes, if he drops the third or fourth round, take him. And a few mocks I have done that because he's just there, and the value, as you said, he's going to get you 25 to maybe even 40 points on a weekly basis. So he's definitely worth it. He's kind of him and Lamar, even though I'm a little bit more out on Lamar than you are. They're the exceptions to the draft quarterback late rule. But don't take Mahomes with your first round pick because you're still going to win your league. You're still going to do fine with a guy like, I don't know, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan, those kind of guys at your quarterback position. But if he drops to that third, fourth range and you feel kind of set with your running backs and receivers, definitely take Mahomes. With Kelsey, he's a guy with him and Kittle. If you kind of miss out, and I tend to go RB heavy in some of my drafts, if you kind of miss out on your the clear cut wide receiver ones, don't be afraid to take Kelsey as a clear-cut tight end over guys like maybe a Kenny Galladay or these guys who could be wide receiver ones, but they're not as set in stone as like the Hopkins, the Thomases, those kind of guys. So don't be afraid to take him in that third, fourth round, fifth round if he drops there, but he's probably not going to drop that low because, as I mentioned before, the Kelsey Kittle drop-off in tight end is so steep. It's insane. And it's not even with Mahomes, it's not as steep as the drop off from Mahomes, the top quarterback, to like Deshaun Watson or Dak Prescott, a guy you can get later in rounds. So I'm a little more high on taking Kelsey a little bit earlier, even though he is a tight end, than I am with taking Mahomes, just because of the drop off and the depth of both positions. But and Tyreek is really good.
Yeah, you're gonna have to pay up to get any one of these players from the Kansas City offense. So. If you're willing to take that and you feel confident you have enough depth in many other positions, then go for it. But if you're in like a 12, 14 team league, I think maybe taking those kind of players early would be better so you can get that positional advantage.
Yeah, I think as you said, this is a really good offense. Everybody seems to know about it now, especially because they won the Super Bowl. The only guy that you could probably get a little bit later than his finishing is probably Edwards-Helaire. But you're going to pay up. Kelsey's been the best tight end in fantasy for feels like 10 years now. Mahomes has been the best quarterback the last few years. So you're going to have to pay up for those guys. But you just got to be careful. You just got to be on the lookout if they kind of start dropping a little bit because everyone's saying this, just wait on quarterback, wait on tight end. If they do tend to drop a little bit, definitely take a shot on him. But especially Mahomes, he's like you said, he's going top 5 picks for sure. That's because you always have that guy who just takes Mahomes. It used to be Tom Brady. Now it's Patrick Mahomes. So, but this is going to be a super fun team to watch, both in fantasy and in real life. And I think it's by the sounds of it, the Chiefs might be Roman and I's Super Bowl picks. But we might do like a NFL final predictions episode where we all kind of give our Super Bowl picks a little bit later on. We get a little bit closer to the season, but who knows? But Chiefs are going to be a really good team, by far the best in this division. But Roman, how about you as we finish off this episode? Are they to be the first team in your division standings, or are they going to be fourth? Are you going to really just completely shock the world here and put them in fourth?
No, obviously they're going to be the first in the division. There's no doubt about it. 12-4, I think, was a solid record from last year. They could improve. They could, stay the same. But I'll give them an even 13-3 this year for them. And then second place in the division, I kind of hinted at it earlier, the Denver Broncos. They'll go 9-7, be a wild card team. That could flip flop with the Raiders depending on how things go throughout the season. They do play Week 17, so I wouldn't be surprised if that game kind of determined who would go to the wild card round from either of those two teams. But as of right now, I'll have the Broncos considerably over them. Raiders, I think, will come in third again, 8-8. I do think they get a lot better, but they're still in the NFC West. They're still going to lose a lot of games to the Chiefs in the future, and they might have an easier schedule than normal, but I need to see it to believe it from Carr a little bit more. And then the Chargers, I think they're going to stick around like 10-6 or 6-10, or 9 or 7-9. So not really. There's not going to be a terrible team in this division. They're all going to be decent, but only 2 from this division going to the playoffs.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit higher on the Raiders than you are, but we got the same order. So I got the Chiefs. I'm gonna have them at 13-3. I think with Mahomes being healthy the whole year, I'm banking on that. I think that gets them at least one more win than they did last year. The Broncos, I'm gonna have them at number 2 at 10-6. I think they're gonna make the playoffs. And then I got the Raiders at 9-7. So basically the same as you, but a little bit higher. I think they're gonna be in the playoff hunt and maybe even sneak into the playoffs if things go their way. At the same time, though, I could see there's a roadmap for them finishing like 6-10, 5-11. If Derek Carr, if injuries kind of sneak up on him, the defense isn't as good as we think it's going to be with all those young players, and Derek Carr proves to not be the guy in Las Vegas. And then the Chargers, I have them at 6-10. I was going to say 5-11, same as last year, but I'll give them one extra win, 6-10. It's not because they're not a good team. I think if they were in another division, they'd probably be more of a 8-8 contending for a playoff spot team. It's just because they're clearly the worst team in this division. However, if this defense just goes off and Tyrod Taylor, I mean, we saw him lead the Bills to the playoffs a couple of years ago. So the potential is there for them to also sneak into the playoffs, but ultimately I think they're going to finish 6-10 and end up missing the playoffs again for a second straight year. But we're pretty much in agreement there. I think I feel like there's a lot of entertaining divisions in the NFL. Maybe outside of the AFC South, but this is one of the top ones for me for sure. They're going to be a lot of fun to watch, even though there is a clear-cut division winner. But the other 3 teams in this division, it's going to be interesting to see what works and what doesn't for all 3 of these teams, because they do all have kind of noticeable kind of question marks and uncertainty about how things are going to land for each of them.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of want to add something a little bit towards the end, kind of irrelevant to the AFC West at least, but I figured I might say it anyways. The news about Earl Thomas getting cut by the Ravens, obviously it happened after our recording of the AFC North, so unfortunately we couldn't talk about it then, but I figured it'd be a nice place just to at least mention it, break that news if you haven't heard about it yet. But that's a big move for the Ravens, so I don't know if you have any thoughts about it.
I mean, I think I saw it coming a little bit, because I know the reports are coming out now that he was not well liked in the Ravens locker room, but I believe I remember hearing some stuff about that last season as well. And obviously there was the whole episode with him in the hotel room that happened a couple months ago. And by all accounts, he wasn't getting along with anybody, especially in training camp now. So he probably was going to get, did he get suspended for the whole thing with the hotel room? Did he end up getting suspended for that?
No, I don't think so, because he ended up playing in that wild card game, or the divisional game.
That was after it, though. It was in the offseason, the hotel room thing. He might get suspended if he hasn't already, or might not. Who knows? But he was already kind of on thin ice, I felt like. And if one team, Earl Thomas is a good player, but if one team can kind of overcome his loss and can live with either cutting him or trading him, I think it's going to be okay. And even Earl Thomas, the last year, he was good, but he was decent, but he wasn't as good as maybe you'd expect Earl Thomas to be, like the guy he was in Seattle. But he left Seattle on weird terms. I think he just might be a difficult guy to get along with. So definitely surprising that they just come out publicly and say, yeah, we're done with him. But yeah, I kind of saw it coming a little bit, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, he'll probably get swooped up right away. I know today they kind of mentioned that Jerry Jones announced that they like Earl Thomas, but they wouldn't be going after him. So the only other notable destinations are San Francisco and Houston, which if we went to Houston, that would make my division prediction look a lot better. But we'll see. Yeah,
maybe Detroit makes a play for him too. We're a defensive-minded team. That'd be cool. But yeah, I think Seattle. What'd you say? You said Houston. What was the other team that he?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. I was like, not Seattle. He's not going back to Seattle after that mess. I think he'd be solid on both those teams. I could see sorry for your Houston pick, but I think I could see San Francisco more likely, just because of the Richard Sherman connection. And I could see him wanting to get back in that division with the Seahawks, and kind of, because that people kind of forget how big of a mess that was a couple of years ago, just because of now all this Ravens drama. But definitely a loss for Baltimore. But again, they'll be fine. They're still a really good team.
Yeah.
But
this didn't fit in this episode, but I thought I'd at least mention it, so we didn't ignore it completely.
Yeah. I think that news broke out, of course, like a little while after we did the AFC North division, which usually happens on this show. We do a bunch of stuff, and then a few seconds later, it's like, hey, Earl Thomas is done. So okay, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Do you have any final thoughts though on the AFC West before we kind of conclude this episode?
Yeah, I just think it's going to be a good division. Maybe not with the most production, but I think the most even peeled teams, as well as obviously the contenders and the Chiefs.
Yeah, the Chiefs are going to be a clear-cut number one, but the other three teams, as we said throughout the episode, are going to be competing all season long. It's going to be really fun to watch. And that's the end of our division breakdowns. It seems like we've been doing these for months now, because we have. We're finally done, and I'm really excited to kind of see what else we do going on from here on the season. All the COVID results and tests seem to be going really well for the NFL, so it looks like we're most likely going to at least start the season, hopefully be able to finish it. So I'm really looking forward to now being done predicting everything and just being able to watch football and seeing what happens on the field. So as I already mentioned, we've done broken down every division. So if you haven't already watched our breakdowns of each division, check those out. And yeah, we're the Zone Defense Podcast again. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Spotify and Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and also search us on Apple Podcasts. In addition to the division episodes we've also done a ton of fantasy mock drafts. We did a few NBA episodes about the bubble. There's going to be a few more NBA bubble episodes coming up here very soon. So definitely check those out if you haven't already. But thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.